Sarah Martinez stood in the corner of the massive training facility, watching as alien warriors twice her size threw each other around like toys. The Catherian Military Academy was famous across 3 solar systems for producing the galaxy's most elite fighters, and somehow she had ended up here. "Another human," growled Commander Zextar, his forearms crossed as he looked down at Sarah with obvious disgust. The reptilian alien scales shifted from green to an annoyed orange. "Why do they keep sending us these fragile creatures?" Sarah kept her face neutral, though her fingers instinctively moved to her jacket sleeve. The thick military-grade fabric felt heavy against her skin. She had worn it every day for the past 3 years, even in the hottest weather. It was her shield, her protection from questions she wasn't ready to answer. "I'm here to learn, sir," she said simply, her voice steady despite the dozens of alien eyes staring at her. The Catherians were the galaxy's dominant military force. Standing 7 feet tall with natural armor plating and 4 powerful arms, they had conquered most of known space through sheer physical superiority. Humans were newcomers to the galactic community, viewed as weak and soft by most alien species. "Learn?" Zexatar's laugh was like rocks grinding together. "Human, you barely reach my chest. Your species has no natural weapons, no armor, no enhanced strength. What could you possibly learn here that would be useful?" Around the training floor, other alien cadets stopped their exercises to watch. Sarah recognized most of the species represented. There were the insectoid Veltari, with their razor-sharp claws, the massive stone-like Gornathi who could punch through solid steel, and the energy-manipulating Cylons whose mental powers could crush minds. "I can learn to be better," Sarah replied, refusing to back down. Zextar's eyes narrowed. "Better at what? Humans are only good for support roles, maintenance, logistics, communication. You have no business in combat training." "With respect, sir, I disagree." The commander's scales shifted to a deeper orange, almost red. In Catherian culture, this was a sign of growing anger. "You disagree? On what basis, human?" Sarah felt every eye in the room on her. This was the moment that would define her time here. She could back down, accept a support role, and fade into the background like so many humans before her. Or she could stand her ground and face whatever came next. "I have experience." "Sir, experience?" Zextar laughed again, louder this time. Other aliens joined in. "What experience could a human have that means anything here? Your species has been in space for less than 50 years. You've never fought a real war." Sarah's jaw tightened. "That's not true, sir." "Really? Tell me, human, what wars has your pathetic species fought that would prepare you for this?" The commander gestured around the room with all 4 arms. "This is training for the Galactic Defense Force. We fight space pirates, rogue AI fleets, and interdimensional threats. What could Earth possibly have taught you about that?" The room fell silent except for the hum of training equipment. Sarah knew what she had to do, but every instinct screamed against it. She had spent 3 years keeping her secrets buried, wearing long sleeves and high collars to hide the truth. But now, faced with this challenge, she realized she had a choice. She could continue hiding and be dismissed as another weak human, or she could show them what humanity was really capable of. "Earth taught me about survival," she said quietly. "About fighting when you're outnumbered, outgunned, and everyone expects you to die." "Survival?" Zextar's voice dripped with contempt. "What would a pampered Earth human know about survival?" Sarah's hand moved to her jacket zipper. Her heart was pounding, but her voice remained steady. "More than you might think, sir." "I think you're making excuses," the commander said, trying to sound tough to avoid admitting you don't belong here. Humans always do this. They make up stories about how special they are instead of accepting their limitations. The other cadets murmured agreement. Sarah had heard it all before. Humans were seen as the galaxy's weaklings, useful only for their technology and creativity, but worthless in actual combat. Most humans accepted this role, content to be the mechanics and engineers while stronger species did the fighting. But Sarah wasn't most humans. "I'm not making excuses, sir," she said, her hand still on the zipper. "I'm trying to be respectful." "Respectful?" Zextar stepped closer, using his size to intimidate her. "How is lying about your capabilities respectful?" "I'm not lying." "Then prove it. Show me this mysterious experience you claim to have." Sarah looked around the room one more time. She saw curiosity in some faces, mockery in others, and outright disbelief in most. They saw a small human female who was clearly out of her depth, making desperate claims to avoid embarrassment. They had no idea what they were asking for. Sarah had joined the Galactic Defense Force for one reason, to prove that humanity deserved a place among the stars. But she had hoped to do it quietly, to let her performance speak for itself without having to explain her past. The universe, it seemed, had other plans. "You want to see my experience?" she asked. "I want you to stop wasting our time," Zextar replied. "Either prove these ridiculous claims or admit you're just another weak human who doesn't belong here." Sarah's fingers found the zipper pull. For 3 years, she had hidden the evidence of what she had survived. For 3 years, she had pretended to be just another human seeking adventure among the stars. But maybe it was time to stop pretending. "All right," she said softly. "You want to know what Earth taught me about survival?" The room was completely silent now. Even the training equipment seemed to sense the tension. Sarah began to pull down the zipper of her jacket. The thick fabric parted slowly, revealing what she had kept hidden for so long. As the jacket fell away from her shoulders, gasps echoed through the training facility. Even Zextar, for all his arrogance, took a step backward. Her arms were covered in scars. Not the clean surgical scars that might come from medical procedures or accidents. These were the brutal, jagged marks of survival. Burn scars twisted around her left forearm like frozen flames. Deep gouges ran across her right shoulder, where something with claws had tried to tear her apart. Puncture wounds dotted her skin in patterns that spoke of desperate fights against impossible odds. But it was the marking on her upper arm that made several aliens actually step backward. A tattoo, black and simple, showing a skull surrounded by barbed wire. Below it, words in several Earth languages. 3rd Battalion, 2nd Infantry Division, Human Colonial Defense Force. "Sweet gravitational forces," whispered a Veltari cadet, his insectoid features showing unmistakable shock. Sarah stood straighter, no longer hiding behind loose fabric. For the first time in 3 years, she let them see what she really was. "Earth taught me about the Hive War." The silence that followed was deafening. Every alien in the room knew about the Hive War, though few had believed the human accounts of it. According to human records, Earth's first colony world, New Geneva, had been attacked by a species called the Devourers, insectoid creatures that consumed entire ecosystems, leaving nothing but dead rock behind. Most galactic historians dismissed human claims about the war as exaggeration. How could such a young species have survived an encounter with planet killers? It was assumed that humans had inflated a minor conflict to make themselves seem more impressive to potential galactic allies. Looking at Sarah's scars, those assumptions suddenly seemed very naive. "The Hive War was 20 years ago," Zextar said slowly, his aggressive posture fading. "You would have been 15, Sarah finished. "Old enough to hold a rifle. Young enough not to know I should be afraid." She rolled up her other sleeve, revealing more scars. These were different, precise, surgical. Devourer bioweapons. They inject their young into living hosts, The larvae eat you from the inside out while keeping you alive as long as possible. A Gornathi cadet, whose rock-like skin was nearly indestructible, made a sound of disgust. How did you survive that? Field surgery, Sarah said simply. My unit's medic was killed in the first wave. We had to learn fast. The marking on her shoulder became visible as she adjusted her position. More text, this time in the harsh, angular script of Earth military notation. Operation Broken Shield, 847 KIA, 12 survivors. Broken Shield, breathed a Cylon cadet. That was the defense of New Geneva's capital city. Sarah nodded. 60,000 devourers against 800 colonists. We held them off for 3 weeks until reinforcements arrived. 800 against 60,000? Zextar's voice had lost all its mockery. That's impossible. Humans are good at impossible things, Sarah replied. We had to be. Earth couldn't spare a real military force. The colony was mostly farmers, engineers, and their families. When the devourers came, we had to become soldiers or die. She pointed to a particular cluster of scars on her forearm. This is from a devourer queen. They're the size of shuttlecraft and have acid for blood. I killed her with a mining charge and a lot of luck. The room was so quiet that Sarah could hear the ventilation systems cycling air. Alien cadets who had been ready to mock her minutes earlier now stared with something approaching awe. The galactic databases say the Hive War was a minor border conflict, said the Veltari cadet, his voice uncertain. Sarah's smile was bitter. The galactic databases say whatever Earth's government wanted them to say. We didn't want to advertise how close we came to extinction. Bad for morale. She touched another scar, this one wrapped around her wrist like a bracelet. Devourer, restraint bioform. They capture you alive when they want to study your species. I was their guest for 6 days before my unit found me. 6 days? The Gornathi cadet's rocky features showed horror. What did they do to you? What they do to all their test subjects. They took me apart to see how humans work. Then they put me back together to test our healing rates. Sarah's voice remained matter-of-fact, but her eyes had gone cold. They were very thorough. Commander Zextar was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. The war ended 20 years ago. What have you been doing since then? Learning, Sarah said. The Hive War taught us that Earth needed better soldiers, so we built better training programs. I've spent 20 years preparing for the next war. What next war? Asked the Cylon. Sarah's smile was sharp as a blade. The one that's coming. The devourers were just the beginning. There are things in the dark between stars that make them look like children playing with toys. She pulled out a small device from her pocket and activated it. A holographic display showed star charts marked with red zones. 3 more human colonies have gone dark in the past year. Same pattern as before the Hive War. Something is coming. The aliens stared at the star charts with growing unease. The red zones formed a pattern, pointing directly toward the galactic core, where most civilized species made their homes. And you think you can fight them? Zextar asked. I think humans can do anything we have to do to survive, Sarah replied. That's what Earth taught me. When you're small and weak and everyone expects you to die, you learn to be smart. You learn to be tough. You learn to win against impossible odds. She looked around the room, meeting each alien's gaze in turn. I didn't come here to play soldier. I came here to learn everything you can teach me about galactic warfare, because when the next war comes, humanity is going to be ready. The silence stretched until Zextar finally spoke. What happened to the other 11 survivors from Broken Shield? Sarah's expression grew distant. Most didn't make it. War doesn't end when the shooting stops. Some couldn't live with what we'd done to survive. Others couldn't stop fighting. 3 joined me in the Colonial Defense Force. 2 are still active. One died in a training accident that wasn't really an accident. And the rest? The rest found peace, Sarah said quietly. They earned it. She began putting her jacket back on, covering the scars once again, but something had fundamentally changed in the room. The aliens no longer saw a weak human trying to play soldier. They saw a veteran warrior who had survived hell and come back stronger. "Why hide it?" asked the Veltari. "Why not tell people what you've done?" Sarah zipped up her jacket, sealing away the evidence of her past. "Because I didn't come here to be feared. I came here to learn. Fear makes people stupid. I needed you to judge me on what I can do now, not what I survived 20 years ago." Commander Zextar was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had completely changed. "What do you want to learn here, soldier?" "Everything," Sarah said simply. "How to fight in zero gravity, how to lead mixed species units, how to coordinate with alien technology, how to think on a galactic scale instead of a planetary one." "Why?" Sarah looked at the star charts still floating in the air, those red zones marking humanity's newest nightmare. "Because the next time something comes for us, I want to be ready to take the fight to them instead of just barely surviving." The commander's scales shifted to a deep blue, the Catherian color of respect. "Training begins at dawn. Don't be late." As the other cadets slowly returned to their exercises, Sarah noticed the difference. They gave her space now, but it wasn't the dismissive distance from before. This was the respectful distance given to someone who had proven themselves in ways that couldn't be questioned. She had come to the academy to learn how to protect humanity from the threats waiting in the dark. But first, she had to convince the galaxy's finest warriors that she belonged among them. Looking at the new respect in alien eyes, Sarah realized she had just taken the first step. Dawn at the Catherian Military Academy came with the shriek of combat alarms. Sarah was already awake, sitting on her narrow bunk and checking her equipment. 3 months of training had taught her that every day here began with a test designed to push cadets beyond their breaking point. "Movement! All cadets to Battle Deck 7! Commander Zextar's voice boomed through the dormitory speakers. Around her, alien cadets scrambled to gather their gear. Sarah moved with calm efficiency, each action precise and automatic. While others fumbled with their equipment, she was already dressed and ready. "How does she do that?" muttered Crixtall, the Veltari cadet who bunked nearby. His insectoid features showed constant amazement at human capabilities. "My species has enhanced reflexes, but she's always ready first." "Practice," Sarah said simply, helping him untangle his gear harness. In the months since revealing her scars, she had become something of a den mother to the younger cadets. They sought her advice on everything from combat tactics to dealing with homesickness. Battle Deck 7 was the Academy's most challenging training facility. The massive chamber could simulate any environment in the galaxy, from the crushing gravity of gas giant surfaces to the airless void of deep space. Today, the walls showed the twisted metal corridors of a derelict spaceship. "Today's exercise is ship-to-ship boarding action," Commander Zextar announced as cadets assembled. His scales showed the neutral gray of serious business. "You will assault a vessel held by hostile forces. The simulation is set to maximum difficulty. Casualties are expected." Sarah studied the holographic ship schematics floating before them. The target was a Hegemony-class dreadnought, massive and heavily defended. According to the data, it held 50 enemy combatants armed with military-grade weapons. "Sir," called out Thondar, a massive Gornathi whose rocky skin could deflect most small arms fire. 50 enemies against 12 cadets? Even in simulation, those odds are impossible." "Impossible?" Zextar's gaze found Sarah. "What do you think, Cadet Martinez?" Every eye turned to her. Over the past 3 months, this had become a pattern. When facing seemingly impossible odds, the instructors asked for the human perspective. It had taken Sarah a while to understand why. Most alien species had evolved with natural advantages. The Catherians had superior strength and armor. The Veltari had speed and claws. The Gornathi were nearly indestructible. But because they had these gifts, they thought in straightforward terms. When facing superior numbers, they relied on their natural abilities to overcome the odds. Humans had no natural advantages. They had survived by being smarter, more creative, and more willing to do whatever it took to win. 50 enemies defending a ship they know better than we do, Sarah said thoughtfully. Established positions, superior firepower, home field advantage? She paused, studying the schematics more carefully. But they're expecting a frontal assault. And, Zextar prompted, we don't give them one. Sarah pointed to a section of the ship's lower hull. This is a hegemony-class dreadnought. I know this design. The waste processing system connects to the ventilation network here. She traced a path through the ship's interior. If we can access the ship's environmental controls, we can turn their advantages against them. The other cadets looked confused. How does that help us? Asked Ceylon Cadet Zimra, her mental abilities already probing the simulation for tactical data. Sarah smiled. How well can you fight when you can't breathe? 20 minutes later, their boarding pod attached to the dreadnought's hull with a metallic clang. Standard procedure called for immediately breaching the nearest airlock and fighting their way to the ship's command center. It was direct, obvious, and exactly what the defenders expected. Instead, Sarah led her squad to a maintenance hatch barely large enough for a human to crawl through. This is insane, muttered Velka, another Catherian who had initially dismissed Sarah as weak. We're elite warriors, not maintenance workers. Elite warriors adapt to the situation, Sarah replied, attaching a plasma cutter to the hatch. Maintenance workers just follow procedures. The narrow passages inside the ship's hull were designed for automated systems, not living beings. For the larger aliens, it was a claustrophobic nightmare. Sarah moved through them like water, her smaller size finally becoming an advantage. How did you know about this access route? Crixtal asked, his insectoid frame struggling with the tight spaces. Experience, Sarah said, consulting a handheld scanner. During the Hive War, we had to learn every trick for getting inside enemy positions. Devourers didn't build convenient doorways for their attackers. They reached the environmental control center without encountering a single enemy. Sarah's fingers flew over the alien control systems, making adjustments that would have taken most cadets hours to understand. What are you doing? Thondar whispered. Adjusting the atmospheric mix, Sarah explained. I'm not poisoning them. That would be against regulations. But I can reduce oxygen levels to about 60% of normal, enough to cause fatigue and slower reaction times. That will affect us, too, pointed out Zimra. Sarah's smile was sharp. Humans evolved at higher altitudes than most species. We're adapted for low oxygen environments. You'll feel it. We won't. As the ship's atmosphere began to change, Sarah led her squad toward the command center. They encountered their first defenders at a corridor junction, 4 alien warriors in full combat armor. The defenders were already breathing hard from the reduced oxygen. Their movements were sluggish, their aim imprecise. Sarah's squad took them down without sustaining a single injury. Remarkable, breathed Zextar's voice through their communication systems. The instructors were monitoring the exercise from the observation deck. Traditional tactics would have resulted in 50% casualties by now. The pattern repeated throughout the ship. Defenders expecting a direct assault found themselves facing tired, confused enemies who attacked from unexpected angles. Sarah seemed to know instinctively where the enemy would be weakest, where their defenses would be thinnest. How does she do it? One instructor asked another as they watched the simulation unfold. She thinks like prey, replied the senior tactical instructor, a grizzled Cytherian veteran. Most of our species evolved as apex predators. We think in terms of strength and dominance. Humans evolved as persistence hunters. They think in terms of patience and cunning. The final assault on the command center demonstrated the difference perfectly. Standard doctrine called for a frontal assault supported by superior firepower. Sarah instead had her squad create multiple diversions, while she infiltrated through the ship's computer network access tunnels. By the time the defenders realized they were under attack from inside their own command center, it was over. "Exercise complete," announced the computer system. "All objectives achieved. Casualties, 0. The simulation faded, revealing the training deck's normal gray walls. Sarah's squad stood victorious, but more importantly, they stood together. The alien cadets, who had once dismissed her as weak, now looked at her with something approaching reverence. "Unbelievable," Commander Zextar said as he entered the deck. "In 15 years of running this simulation, no squad has ever achieved 0 casualties. We had advantages," Sarah said modestly. "The enemy wasn't expecting human tactics." "Human tactics," the commander repeated thoughtfully. "Is that what we should call what just happened?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "My people have a saying, when you can't win by being stronger, win by being smarter. We've had to be creative to survive." Over the following weeks, word of the simulation spread throughout the academy. Other squads began requesting Sarah's tactical input for their exercises. Instructors started incorporating human strategic thinking into their lesson plans. But it was during a routine training accident that Sarah truly proved her worth to her fellow cadets. The accident happened during a zero-gravity combat exercise. Cadet Morthak, a young Gornathi, had become disoriented during a complex maneuver and crashed into the training chamber's power coupling. The resulting explosion sent him spinning helplessly through the zero-gravity environment, his rocky skin cracked and bleeding from internal injuries. Most species would have waited for emergency medical teams to arrive. Gornathi physiology was complex, their internal structure very different from other species. Attempting to treat them without proper medical knowledge could cause more harm than good. Sarah didn't hesitate. She launched herself through the zero-gravity space with movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. Catching Morthak's massive form should have been impossible for someone her size, but she used his momentum against him, redirecting rather than stopping his motion. "Hold still," she told him, pulling out a medical kit that was far more advanced than standard academy issue. "Gornathi internal bleeding presents at the joint seams first. I need to see your left shoulder." "How do you know that?" Morthak gasped, his rocky features showing pain and confusion. Sarah was already working, her hands moving with the sure precision of extensive medical training. "During the Hive War, we fought alongside everyone. Gornathi mercenaries, Veltari scouts, even a few Cytherians. When you're the medic for a mixed-species unit, you learn fast or people die." She injected him with something that immediately began closing his internal wounds. "Synthesized Gornathi healing enzymes. Your people heal differently than everyone else. Standard medical supplies are useless for you." "How did you know to bring that?" asked Crickstall, floating nearby with obvious amazement. "I read everyone's medical files," Sarah said simply, continuing her work. "Human medics are trained to treat any species they might encounter. It's not enough to know how to fight alongside aliens. You have to know how to keep them alive." By the time the Academy medical team arrived, Morthak was stable and conscious. The doctors examined Sarah's work with obvious surprise. "Excellent field medicine," the chief medical officer announced. "Textbook treatment for Gornathi trauma." "Where did you learn this?" "Earth Colonial Defense Force medic training," Sarah replied. "Cross-species emergency medicine was mandatory." That evening, Sarah found herself surrounded by alien cadets in the Academy's recreation area. They peppered her with questions about human medicine, human tactics, human survival techniques. She answered them all patiently, sharing knowledge that most humans took for granted. "I don't understand," said Velka, the Catherian who had once mocked Sarah's presence at the academy. "Your species has only been in space for 50 years. How do you know so much about galactic warfare?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Because we've been preparing for it our entire history. Humans have been fighting each other for thousands of years. We've learned every possible way to kill and survive. When we finally reached the stars, we just applied those lessons on a larger scale. But the other species have been fighting for centuries too," pointed out Zimra. "Have they?" Sarah asked. "The Catherians conquered most of their territory through superior strength. The Veltari dominated through speed and coordination. The Gornathi simply outlasted their enemies. Most galactic species won their wars by being better at what they were naturally good at." She looked around the room at the assembled aliens. "Humans don't have natural advantages. We had to develop artificial ones. Technology, tactics, adaptability. We had to learn to fight enemies who were stronger, faster, and tougher than we were, because if we didn't learn, we died." "And now?" asked Morthak, his rocky features showing genuine curiosity. Sarah pulled out her personal datapad and showed them the star charts she had displayed months earlier. The red zones had expanded since then, with 3 more human colonies going dark. "Now something is coming that's stronger than all of us," she said grimly. "And when it arrives, the galaxy is going to need every advantage it can get." The recreation room fell silent. The alien cadets stared at the expanding red zones with growing unease. "What do you think it is?" Krixtall asked quietly. "I think it's something that makes the Devourers look friendly," Sarah replied. "And I think we're running out of time to get ready." Commander Zextar appeared in the doorway, his scales showing the deep blue of serious concern. "Cadet Martinez, report to my office immediately." Sarah rose, noting the unusual tension in the commander's voice. As she left the recreation area, she could hear the alien cadets talking quietly among themselves. They were asking questions she couldn't answer, worried about threats she couldn't yet fully explain. But as she walked through the academy corridors, Sarah felt a grim satisfaction. For the first time since arriving here, the aliens were taking human warnings seriously. They were beginning to understand that their natural advantages might not be enough for what was coming. The galaxy was about to learn what humans had always known. When facing impossible odds, survival wasn't about being stronger or faster. It was about being willing to do whatever it took to win. Commander Zextar's office was filled with senior academy instructors and military officials Sarah had never seen before. Their faces showed the kind of grim tension that meant something terrible had happened. "Sit down, Cadet Martinez," the commander said, his scales showing the mottled gray of extreme stress. "We need to talk." Sarah took the offered chair, her eyes scanning the room. She recognized Admiral Korthon, the legendary Catherian fleet commander. Beside him stood General Vexari of the Veltari Strategic Command and Chancellor Gromtok of the Gornathi Defense Council. These were the galaxy's top military leaders. 4 hours ago, Admiral Korthon began without preamble, we lost contact with the Centauri Defense Station. Initial investigation suggested system failure. We were wrong. A holographic display activated showing a massive space station orbiting a blue giant star. The Centauri station was one of the galaxy's most important defensive positions, guarding the approach to the core worlds where most civilized species lived. Reconnaissance drones reached the station 30 minutes ago, General Vexari continued, her insectoid features showing unusual agitation. What they found defies explanation. The hologram shifted, showing the same station from the drone's perspective. Sarah felt her blood run cold. The massive structure was covered in what looked like biological growth, pulsing organic matter that had spread across the metal like some kind of infection. "Sweet gravitational forces," she whispered. "It's not just taking over the station, it's digesting it." "You recognize this?" Chancellor Gromtalk's rocky voice held desperate hope. Sarah nodded grimly. "I've seen something similar before. During the Hive War, the Devourers had a final protocol when they were losing. They would release something they called the Consuming Dark." The room fell silent. Sarah stood and approached the hologram, studying the organic growth patterns with the eye of someone who had seen too much. "The Devourers weren't the apex predator in their home galaxy," she explained. "They were running from something. This is what they were running from." "How can you be certain?" Admiral Corthon asked. Sarah pulled up her sleeve, revealing a particular scar on her forearm, a perfect circle of dead tissue surrounded by radiating burn marks. "Because I've been infected by this before." The military leaders exchanged shocked glances. Commander Zextar's scales had gone completely white. "During the defense of New Geneva," Sarah continued, "a dying devourer queen released a sample of this organism. It infected 12 people before we figured out how to stop it." She traced the circular scar. "I was one of them." "How did you survive?" General Vexari leaned forward intently. "Human stubbornness," Sarah said with a bitter smile. "The organism is designed to convert other life forms into itself. It reads genetic patterns and rewrites them, but human genetics are messy. We have so much junk DNA, so many random mutations and viral insertions that the organism couldn't get a clean read." She activated her personal data pad, showing genetic scan data that made no sense to anyone but a specialist. "Most species have clean, efficient genetic codes. Humans have 20 million years of evolutionary accidents cluttering up our DNA. The organism got confused trying to convert us." "But you said it infected 12 people," Chancellor Gromtalk pointed out. "What happened to the others?" Sarah's expression grew dark. 3 died before we understood what was happening. 5 had to be put out of their misery when the conversion process went wrong. 4 of us survived because human medical technology is designed to work with our chaotic biology. And the organism? We burned it out with targeted radiation therapy. Crude, brutal, and extremely painful. But it worked. Sarah looked back at the hologram of the infected station. "The question is, how did it get here?" Admiral Corthon activated another display. 3 days ago, we detected an unusual energy signature in the Void Nebula, the same region where human colonies have been going dark. Our scout ships investigated and found this. The new hologram showed something that made everyone in the room step backward. It was a ship, but not like anything in the galactic databases. The vessel was massive, easily dreadnought-sized, but its hull seemed to writhe and pulse like living tissue. Organic weapon ports opened and closed like mouths, and the entire structure appeared to be breathing. "It's a hybrid," Sarah said quietly. "The organism doesn't just convert people, it converts technology too. That's a devourer ship that's been infected and transformed." "The ship attacked our scouts," General Vexari continued. "We lost 3 vessels before the remainder escaped. The attack patterns were unlike anything we've encountered. The ship seemed to anticipate our tactics before we implemented them." Sarah nodded grimly. "Because it has the memories of every species it's converted. Every tactical doctrine, every weapon system, every defense protocol. It learns from everything it absorbs." "How many ships does it have?" she asked. The silence that followed answered her question. "We don't know," Admiral Corthon admitted. "The organism has been converting devourer fleets for who knows how long. There could be hundreds of infected vessels." Sarah walked to the window overlooking the Academy training grounds. Below, alien cadets continued their exercises, unaware that their galaxy was facing extinction. "What do you want from me?" she asked without turning around. Your expertise, Commander Zextar said. You're the only person in this room who has faced this threat and survived. We need to know how to fight it. Sarah laughed bitterly. You can't fight it. Not conventionally. Every ship you lose becomes part of their fleet. Every planet they capture becomes a production facility. Traditional military thinking just feeds them resources. Then what do you suggest? Chancellor Gromtalk asked. Sarah turned back to face the room, her expression showing the cold calculation of someone who had made impossible decisions before. We evacuate the Centauri station and everything around it, then we turn it into the galaxy's largest bomb. The military leaders stared at her in shock. You want to destroy one of our most important defensive positions? Admiral Corthon sputtered. I want to deny it to the enemy, Sarah corrected. The organism spreads through contact. Every piece of technology it touches becomes part of its network. We can't let it establish a foothold in our space. The loss of Centauri Station would leave the core worlds defenseless, General Vexari protested. The core worlds are already defenseless, Sarah replied bluntly. You just don't realize it yet. This organism doesn't follow galactic military doctrine. It doesn't respect borders or make treaties. It doesn't want territory or resources. It wants to turn everything in the galaxy into itself. She activated her datapad again, showing tactical projections that made the room's occupants pale. Based on devourer expansion patterns during the Hive War, the organism will convert Centauri Station completely within 72 hours. Once it has a secure base of operations, it will begin spreading to adjacent systems. Within 1 month, it will control the entire galactic core. Unless, Commander Zextar prompted, unless we show it that fighting humans is more expensive than it's worth, Sarah said grimly. The organism is efficient. It only invades galaxies where the cost of conversion is lower than the resources gained. We need to make this galaxy too expensive to convert. Admiral Corthon leaned forward. How do we do that? Sarah's smile was sharp as a blade. We fight dirty. We use every trick humans have learned in 20,000 years of warfare. We make them pay for every inch of space, every piece of technology, every single converted organism. She began outlining a plan that would have been considered barbaric by galactic military standards, booby-trapped equipment that would destroy infected vessels from within. Biological weapons designed to target the organism's conversion process. Scorched earth tactics that would deny the enemy any useful resources. This is madness, General Vexari said after Sarah finished. You're talking about turning the galaxy into a war zone. The galaxy is already a war zone, Sarah replied. The organism declared war on every living thing here the moment it arrived. We can either fight on our terms or wait to be converted on theirs. The Galactic Council will never approve such extreme measures, Chancellor Gromtalk pointed out. Then we don't ask for approval, Sarah said quietly. We act. The room fell silent. What Sarah was suggesting bordered on military insurrection, taking action without proper authorization from civilian governments. You're asking us to risk our careers, our reputations, everything we've built, Admiral Corthon said slowly. I'm asking you to risk everything to save everything, Sarah corrected. Because if we wait for proper authorization, there won't be a galaxy left to govern. Commander Zexitar's scales shifted to a deep blue, the color of resolve. What do you need? Access to the Academy's advanced training facilities, Sarah said immediately, and permission to train a special operations unit using human tactical doctrine. How long do you need? Sarah looked at the hologram still showing the infected station. The organic growth had visibly expanded even in the few minutes they had been talking. 48 hours, she said, and every alien cadet brave enough to learn how humans really fight. 12 hours later, the Academy's most advanced training deck had been converted into a nightmare scenario, Sarah stood before 60 alien cadets, volunteers who had agreed to undergo accelerated training in human combat doctrine. "Everything you've learned about honorable warfare is now irrelevant," she told them bluntly. "The enemy doesn't follow rules. They don't respect surrender. They don't take prisoners. They only understand total destruction." She activated a training program that simulated fighting infected vessels. The aliens watched in shock as human tactical doctrine unfolded before them. "Humans fight to win," Sarah explained, as the simulation showed a small human force defeating a much larger enemy through deception and sabotage. "We don't care about honor or fair play. We care about survival." The training that followed would have horrified the Academy's traditional instructors. Sarah taught the alien cadets to think like guerrilla fighters, to use the enemy's strength against them, to sacrifice anything necessary for victory. Krikstal, now promoted to squad leader, struggled with the moral implications. "This isn't warfare," he protested. "This is terrorism. When your enemy wants to convert your entire species into itself," Sarah replied coldly, "terrorism becomes patriotism. The organism doesn't give us the luxury of fighting clean." As the training progressed, Sarah noticed something remarkable happening. The alien cadets were adapting to human tactics faster than she had expected. More importantly, they were improving on them, adding their own species' advantages to human cunning. Velka combined Cytherian strength with human stealth tactics, creating assault techniques that were devastating in their efficiency. Zimra used her mental abilities to coordinate complex deceptions that would have been impossible for baseline humans. Morthak learned to use his rocky hide as mobile cover while employing human flanking maneuvers. "You're all thinking like humans now," Sarah told them as the training session ended. "That's going to save your lives." "How do you know?" asked Thandar. Sarah pulled up her sleeve one last time, showing the circular scar from her infection. "Because I've seen what happens when you try to fight this thing conventionally. It doesn't work. The organism is too adaptive, too efficient. But it doesn't understand human irrationality." "What do you mean?" Krikstal asked. "Most species make logical decisions based on cost-benefit analysis," Sarah explained. "If the cost of fighting exceeds the potential gain, they surrender or withdraw. Humans don't think that way. When we're threatened with extinction, we become completely irrational. We'll destroy ourselves rather than be conquered." She looked around at the assembled aliens, seeing something new in their eyes. They weren't looking at her as a small human anymore. They were looking at her as a war leader. "The organism expects logical resistance based on galactic military doctrine. It's prepared for that. But it's not prepared for a species that would rather burn the entire galaxy than let it be converted." "And you think that will work?" Velka asked. Sarah's smile was grim. "It has to. Because if it doesn't, there won't be anyone left to try anything else." 24 hours later, Sarah stood on the bridge of the GDF Retribution, watching as her mixed-species strike force approached the infected Centauri station. The station had grown visibly larger, the organic matter spreading across its hull like cancer. "Target confirmed," reported Krikstal from the tactical station. "The organism has converted approximately 60% of the station's mass." "Any sign of infected vessels?" Sarah asked. "3 contacts," replied Zimra from sensors. "Configuration suggests converted devourer ships, but heavily modified." Sarah nodded. "Then it's time to show them why humans survived the Hive War." What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for generations. Sarah's strike force didn't attack the infected station directly. Instead, they used a combination of human cunning and alien abilities to turn the organism's own advantages against it. First, they transmitted false distress signals that drew the infected ships away from the station. When the enemy vessels approached to convert the damaged ships, they found themselves facing vessels that exploded in precisely calculated ways, sending infected debris flying in directions that would prevent it from reaching other targets. Meanwhile, Sarah led a boarding team onto the station itself, using the maintenance tunnels and service corridors that had served her so well during academy training. But this time they weren't there to capture the station. They were there to convince the organism that humans were too dangerous to convert. Moving through the infected corridors was like traveling through the digestive system of some massive creature. The walls pulsed with organic growth, and the air itself seemed thick with the organism's presence. "This is insane," whispered Morthak as they crawled through a service tunnel that was slowly being consumed by organic matter. "This is human," Sarah replied grimly. "We're not trying to win. We're trying to teach them that fighting us costs more than we're worth." They reached the station's central computer core, now almost completely converted into organic processing centers. Sarah began setting charges while her team held defensive positions. "The organism is trying to communicate," reported Zimra, her mental abilities detecting the alien intelligence. "It wants to know why we're destroying resources it could convert." "Tell it," Sarah said as she armed the explosives, "that humans would rather destroy everything than let it be taken." The charges detonated 30 seconds after Sarah's team evacuated, turning the Centauri station into the galaxy's largest firework. But more importantly, they sent a message that rippled through the organism's collective intelligence. Humans were too costly to convert. They would destroy anything rather than let it fall into enemy hands. They fought with a viciousness that made victory pyrrhic at best. The organism's response was swift. The infected ships withdrew from the system, heading back toward the dark space between galaxies where they had originated. "Are they retreating?" asked Admiral Corthon over the communication system. "They're cutting their losses," Sarah replied, watching the enemy vessels disappear into hyperspace. "The organism operates on efficiency. We just proved that conquering this galaxy would cost more resources than it would gain." As the strike force returned to Academy space, Sarah found herself surrounded by alien cadets, who now looked at her with something approaching worship. "You saved the galaxy," Krixtal said in amazement. "We all did," Sarah corrected. "But we didn't destroy the threat. We just convinced it to look elsewhere. The organism is still out there, looking for easier targets." "Then what do we do now?" asked Velka. Sarah looked out at the stars, thinking of all the species and civilizations scattered across the galaxy. Most of them had no idea how close they had come to extinction. "Now we get ready for the next threat," she said, "because there's always a next threat, and when it comes, the galaxy will need soldiers who think like humans." Commander Zextar's voice came over the communications system. "Cadet Martinez, when we return to the Academy, report to my office for promotion ceremonies." "Promotion, sir?" "The Galactic Defense Force is creating a new unit," the commander explained. "Special Operations Division, trained in human tactical doctrine. They'll need a commanding officer." Sarah smiled, touching the scars hidden beneath her jacket. She had come to the Academy to prove that humans deserved a place among the stars. Instead, she had proven that sometimes the galaxy needed to think like humans to survive. "Understood, sir," she replied. "I'll start recruiting immediately." As the Academy came into view, Sarah began planning her next training program. There were still threats in the dark between stars, still enemies who saw the galaxy as nothing more than resources to be consumed. But now the galaxy had something it had never had before. Soldiers trained to fight like humans. And as any survivor of the Hive War could tell you, there was nothing more dangerous in the universe than a human with something to protect, and the will to do whatever it took to protect it. The scars on her arms were proof of that. And now, they were the galaxy's best hope for survival.